I actually seen him school under Sean the week, either last week or the week before, and he jumped particularly well.
Hello and welcome back to the Jump Show, and those listening for the third time this season may notice this is the third different person introducing the Jump Show, which bit of a shambles really, but we do have a good reason for it this time, because this is going to be a special episode of the show. We're going to very much take a look at the new recruits coming over, both from France and indeed from the point-to-point sphere as well. Before we go into that, just a massive thank you for all the support on the first two videos so far. It's been very much appreciated. I'm glad so many of you are very interested in some of the 108 rated handicappers we're able to get into at a very early stage of the season, and we are very much closing in on 3,000 subscribers. So if you haven't already, please do click that button, and if we get to 200 likes on this video, that would be fantastic. So for this video, we're going to split it into two parts. The second part, we're going to look at the French recruits, where Adam Mills is going to join us for that. But for the first part, we're very going to focus on the point-to-pointers, where we're delighted to say that Paul Ferguson has joined us, for the author of the fantastic Jumpers to Follow book. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. And for those who perhaps don't know the work that goes into that book, just give our viewers a bit of an insight into the depth of work that goes into that, because every year, I have to say, I'm astounded at the detail that you produce year in, year out.
Thanks, Dan. Very kind. Pleasure to be here. I basically start the book as soon as Punchestown entry is over. So late April until the end of August, that's it, hibernated away. Managed to sneak a holiday in sometimes, like this year, just for a week, but miss out on most of the flat stuff like yourself, and buried away watching, as you say, watching all the point-to-points and mainly bumpers back. So the book predominantly features horses at the early stage of their careers, and hoping to signal them from an early age, and hopefully at some stage they will become more household names. But that's it. The main section of the book, as always, my 50 leading prospects, but there's a whole host of other things in there. Around the yards is my personal view of yards up and down the country, big and small. As you say, point-to-points in French recruits. We've got 9 jockeys this year contributing. Excellent content from Harry Skelton, Harry Cobden, and John Joe Neal in particular, obviously linked in detail to big stables, so almost like mini stable tours from those three. Danny McMenamin joined for the first time this year, and I was keen to get Danny on board because I thought Nicky Richards had a strong team of bumper horses last year. So again, he'd be a stable I'd be keen on following up north this season. Hopefully there's something in there for everyone, and seems to be well received, which is the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my personal favorite sections, I think Dan as well, is the jockey section, where you get to really see everything from the horse's mouth, how these jockeys really feel about the horses and what their plans are for the season ahead. And obviously the newest book for the 2025-2026 season is out now, and exclusive to the Jump Show viewers, we are going to be giving you all a special discount on the print, the digital, or the print and digital bundle editions. So in order to claim £3 off from any of those above editions I've just mentioned, use discount code JSJTF2526. That basically gives you 25% off the digital edition, which I think is an absolute bargain. Dan and I get this book every single year. We always go through and flick through and see what's going on. So yeah, if you want to go and make sure you avail of that offer, we'll put the link in the description to the website, and obviously I'll leave the discount code in there as well, so you can get that nice and easily and make avail of that offer.
Yeah, to those of you who perhaps haven't got it before, it really is a fantastic starting point specifically for the jump season. It gets you a bit of an edge going into the campaign, especially in early season races where perhaps you're weighing up a bit of information that might be missing. It really is an informative read, so very much recommended. And we are also giving away 2 copies of the print edition to 2 of you lucky viewers, and in order to enter the competition for that, please like the video and comment below Jumpers to Follow, and the winner will be selected at random and announced on our season preview video, which will come out next week on the 1st of October.
With all that admin out of the way, let's get cracking with some actual horses to talk through, shall we, Paul? And where better to start than Crystal d'Estravail? Now, this was obviously the highest paid point-to-point recruit in the last year or so, 400 grand to Harry Durham. And I believe you've been down to the stable and you've seen him, Paul, is that right?
Yeah, it was at Harry's a fortnight ago, I think 13 days ago now, yeah. He's actually got a strong team of point-to-pointers come through. There was four in particular who stood out, three of which feature in the book itself. There was a fourth one down here called the Crystal Destraval. I know you're quite keen on him yourself. He's an obvious horse to focus on, like you say. Cost 400 grand, topped the sale at the festival sale. I think his pedigree as much as anything else. Crystal Ocean, one of the new sires on the roster, is obviously becoming quite popular. But on the dam side as well, he's out of a raw Destraval, who herself was a high class hurdler. So he's got the pedigree to match. He was impressive in heavy ground, although two horses pulled clear. To be honest, I didn't think it wasn't a complete walkover. Funny enough, the horse who finished second was called No Walkover, and he's now in training with David White, with David Pipe, I think for Brocade Racing. So I expect that form will work out well. The one I particularly like, I wouldn't say more so, but I think probably was visually more impressive, was Clondor Park, who was the second top lot at the festival sale. She cost 320,000, which obviously is a lot for a filly, a 4-year-old walking the park filly. Again, she won on heavy ground, but I just like the way she travelled through the race. Quick and clear, travelled and jumped really well. I did actually ask Harry, he nominated her as his horse to follow for the season, and he said he was still undecided whether she would go down the bumper route or go straight over hurdles. I would imagine the pace that she showed, I'd be surprised if she didn't start off in bumpers, and you'd be disappointed if she didn't win one when she reappears. And then, as you say, hopefully you'd be looking at maybe retaining it in bumpers throughout the season and looking at something like the Nickel Coin later on at Aintree. That form hasn't really been tested to a great degree, but the fifth, who was beating 15 lengths, horse called Lux Matter, did come out and run in a Hexham bumper, albeit during the summer, but got to within a head of winning that, finishing second. So there's a little bit of context to the form, but there wasn't much. It was more a visual impression with her. She did quicken up stylishly. I don't think, obviously she handled heavy ground well, but I don't think that better ground would be too much of an issue with her.
And you mentioned a couple of others as well. Obviously, Harry Derham's got a pretty strong team, as you mentioned. Who are the other two that you were able to see that might be worth keeping on side?
The Burren man, he finished second actually. He was being by a horse who's gone to Willie, and he looked more of a 3 mile chaser in the making to me. So whether he starts in a bumper or not, I think he will progress with time as he goes up in trip over obstacles. He's definitely one to keep an eye out. I didn't actually see any of them three out of the boxes, but the one who I did see Cantering was a horse called, I'm going to butcher the name here, the French pronunciation, but Le Fremieux, I think is how you pronounce it. He will carry the colours of Simon Munir and Isaac Swade, as he did when he won his point-to-point. And again, he looked a sharper type. I would think he'd be one who'd be capable of winning a bumper and doing well over hurdles to begin with.
Yeah, you touched on it just then when you were talking about the two Harry Durham horses, about the visual impression they gave. Is that something that you mainly look for when you're looking through the Irish points in the summer and you're trying to work out what are the exciting recruits or not?
Yeah, obviously, a lot of people would just start by looking at the boutique sales and looking at those that cost a lot. But it depends which way you're looking at it. In terms of what I'm looking at to include in the book, I'd always look for a horse who travels well through a race. Sometimes you see time and time again that horses who've got maybe not so the form figures aren't as flashy as the bigger owners. For example, I would most of the time look just for a 4-year-old who's won first time out, I would think. So if you're looking at the catalogue for a trainer or an owner example who might be looking further down in terms of budget or something, you might have to look for a horse possibly didn't get the trip but travelled well to 2 out, ran in a race that you think could be strong. Times wise, I wouldn't be a great person on times now on like bumpers and hurdle races or anything, but I think it can be significant in point to points, certainly when you're comparing them to other races on the card. So if they were quick in comparison to the other races, per se, quite often the 4-year-old races will be split into 2 divisions, and one division maybe a lot stronger than the other or a lot quicker, things like that. But yeah, basically, as with anything and with bumpers, looking for a horse who can travel and obviously show an aptitude to jump is another positive.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it could be quite hard to assess, I guess, the validity and the depth of those points early on. I guess a lot of people maybe wait for form to work out in behind, but again, we're trying to find those edges early on. So that's an interesting insight in how to look at those point-to-point forms. You mentioned about the cost and the big owners, and one who definitely doesn't have an issue getting into his pocket is JP, who's got an interesting one with Willie Mullins called Mighty Park. And I think we might have some fun with him just on the pedigree alone, being a three parts brother to Mike Bite, who many will remember for his antics over the years.
Yeah, three parts brothers to my pay, half brothers to beat that, who was another Grade One winner, obviously won the Sefton. Novice there, going back a few years. Mighty Park was actually beaten first time out. But again, looking at the physical aspect of us, obviously, a lot of the time I'm personally only seeing them on screen. So if I am the odd time when I am asked to look at a catalogue, maybe for a certain owner or a trainer, just for an opinion on a race, obviously then it would be down to them to go and inspect the horse and look at it from that. But even when I'm looking at it for the book perspective, you're trying to look at a horse who's got the size and scope to go on, not just a small individual. And that's very much the case with Mighty Park. Looks a huge, imposing individual, to be honest. So whether we see him in bumpers, that would obviously be the usual route for Willie to go with a high-class 4-year-old. But just looking at him physically, possibly maybe he would be one who would go straight to hurdles. But he travelled really well. So I think he hit the front about 2 out. And possibly he was just beaten by a horse who I thought maybe handled the sharper track a little bit better and had already had race experience on side. That's a horse called Harry Lowes, who's now in training with Dan Skelton, and crucially, he was already owned by JP McManus. So it gives you an indication that the McManus team were quite strong on that form. But he jumped well, as I say, on his way to hitting the front, and then was just beaten late on with that. And then talking about, as it's touched upon, timings, that division was actually 13 seconds quicker than Division 2, which was won by another McManus horse, Sound as a Bell. So whilst the form wasn't tested, I think in that first division, we saw two good horses coming to the fore. And I just like the way he travelled through the race, and say, lacking that initial experience, Mighty Park would probably be the one I would take out the race personally.
Yeah, that's interesting. You say that JP link throughout. I mean, they know what they've got typically as well, especially Derek O'Connor, a massive hand in that point-to-point department now with JP. So that's a good link to follow, I suppose. This happens all the time as well. If an owner really likes one, they'll often look in behind and say, well, that might be one worth keeping on side as well. And I guess another massive ownership operation would be Gigginstown. Obviously, a lot of them with Gordon Elliott. And we tend to get a few early in the season who we tend to get whispers about this might be a bumper horse to follow. And we've had it in recent years. The likes of Marjax Hill was very much touted this time last year as their bumper horse. But the one who seems to be getting the word at the minute is Lemmy Caution, 250-grand purchase by Tunis. Would he be a type you think is a really bumper type? Obviously, we think more of them as being 3-mile chasers down the line, but is he going to be a bumper prospect to keep on side, do you think?
Given where he's trained now, like I say with Gordon, I would imagine Gordon he's not shy, he doesn't like to shy away from running in the bumpers, especially if he thinks they're a good one and he could end up being graded class. I thought that best aspect of his performance for me was his jumping. So personally, I'd be more interested in him if he went straight over hurdles. That's not to say he can't develop into a good bumper horse, of course, but again, I'll always, when I'm going through them, the key traits and the main note I had against him was the way he jumped through the race. So I'd like to see him maybe go straight over hurdles, but I think again, you look at who is training him and their typical MO, and Gordon would normally send a good 4-year-old down the bumper route. As you say, by Tunis, 4-year-old, so he's got plenty of time on his side. And again, a popular side at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if we're going to stray a bit away from the obvious, then we've been through Gordon, we've been through Willie. You've got one here who's trained in Britain by probably a combination that are definitely on the up, but not be people's first port of calls for a point-to-point recruit, perhaps.
Yeah, half the world away. Do well to say that name without singing along to the to the theme tune of the royal family. But yeah, he's trained now by Oliver Greenall and Josh Guerrero. She's a 4-year-old filly by Jetaway. She finished runner-up to a mare called Lime on Gin, who obviously, given that name connection, unsurprisingly, is now with Rob Court. She herself cost 130 grand, having finished second, to say. But what it was I liked about her was her attitude, because she set off at a strong pace, and you could have easily forgiven her falling in a hole, I thought, when she was when the winner took over between the final two fences. But to her credit, she came back for more, kept going, was only beaten 3.5 lengths at the line. There was 22 lengths back to the third. And I say I just really liked the way that she stuck to the task. I'd imagine she probably, in time, again, she probably wants a trip. So whether Whether they will start her off in a soft ground bumper somewhere on a stiff track like Carlisle would probably be suitable. Or when she goes over hurdles, to say I would expect her to need maybe 2.5 miles to be seen to best effect. But according to Oliver and Josh, is on the way to Bangor a couple of weeks ago, last Friday. Again, wouldn't be one who would particularly stand out in terms of looks or anything, but a nice, well put together mare, and seems to be doing everything nicely and pleasing them at home. So yeah, she'd be one again. Maybe less obvious, as you say, rather than looking straight towards the bigger stables.
Yeah, I mean, as you just mentioned, Robco, though, I guess we better touch on one of their other recruits. They've been very busy this summer, both in the French games we'll touch on later,
Yeah.
and the point-to-point recruits as well. But this Manila Machine was the top point-to-pointer at the Punchestown Festival sale, €350,000. I mean, he looks pretty damn decent. Obviously, his manner of victory was exaggerated by the folder at the last. That was Bandy Organizee, who's now with Rebecca Curtis, and again, probably looks like a nice recruit in himself. But yeah, this Melon Machine, what do you think of him, Paul?
Yeah, sorry, you cut out a little bit there, Jake. I missed what you said, but I did it a year to introduce the horse. Yeah,
Yeah.
Melon Machine. Yeah, as you say, lovely pedigree, half brother to Jubilee Alpha, and again, I thought it was a decent race. Yeah, I could understand completely, given the pedigree, why he cost so much, and I think he'd be an obvious one going forward. Again, talking about the way trainers do things, Henry wouldn't necessarily be one who would always go down the bumper route we've seen before. Sometimes he likes to go. It depends. I suppose with him, it depends when they come to hand. If the later on he likes that point-to-point bumper, doesn't he? At Gore, and we've seen
Yeah.
over the years, which doesn't march often the Saturday before Cheltenham. So it might, again, depend if he's a forward type or that. I wouldn't know in that regard, but there was plenty to like about the way he done it. But again, there was one in behind there. I thought Band Organize or Organize. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but talking about value purchase, I think he was about 125 grand. But in comparison for where he was in the race when he came down, I thought he showed plenty of ability, probably by a less fashionable sire, a less obvious pedigree. Again, he'd fallen the time before as well. So those kind of form figures will put a lot of people off. But Rebecca Curtis has taken a chance on him. And I say, if you like Manila Machine, you should certainly be following this one when he comes out in a bumper or in a novice hurdle.
Yeah, the idea of value nowadays is so skewed. I think inflation has just gone so through the roof. Used to think, oh, maybe you get a sort of early tens of thousands purchase, that might be value. You've struggled to really find many of them around anymore. It's really has just gone one way. And one yard in particular who's had a lot of investment, a lot of new recruits to their yard is Ollie Murphy, on the back of a very successful season last year. He's seemingly got a few new interesting pointers, one of them being Mr. Saint Eloi, who did fail to win in two of his starts, but seemingly showed plenty of promise.
Yeah, he did. I really liked him, and He is one that I've seen up close on a number of occasions. Obviously, Ollie's would be 1 yard who I have a bit more dealing with than others, so I tend to get to see his horse a lot more. And I was actually at the yard not long after he'd arrived, and he looked a bit of a shell of a horse, I thought, and having seen him a couple of times in the past couple of weeks, he is one, I know, like the old adage, but he is one who has really done well for the summer break. So, and given his size, that he's only a 4-year-old, I was amazed that he was able to run. And those two runs came in only 8 days apart. He unseated 4 out the first time, and I say 8 days later, he seemed to show no ill effects of that. He was allowed to bowl along in front and seemed to enjoy himself the way he jumped. He went through the race like the best horse and just started to wander a little bit after the last. If you watch the race back, anyone watches the race back, you'll see jumping. I think he got tight a little bit too out, and then he wandered off a true line after the last, wandered to the left, and that probably cost him victory. He was beaten ahead by Hardly Surprising. Again, one for JP McManus. The winner's actually a half brother to Fiddler on the Roof, and now in training with Harry Fry. So again, I would expect that form to work out. And for me, the way Mr. Saint Eloi went through the race, I thought he went through the race like the best horse. And he is now in the ownership of Graham and Diana Waitley. Again, physically looking at him, you could say he could easily probably go straight over hurdles, but Ollie would normally like to go down a bumper route with his nice 4-year-old, so I'd expect that to be the case.
Yeah, is there any others in Ollie's yard then that you want to mention whilst we're talking about it?
Yeah, again, he's been really busy as he always is. Ballycommon Boy would be one name to note. I think that's a race that should work out really well. He beat a horse called the Irish Avatar, who's gone to Willie Mullins. There's a couple more in behind. One's gone to Nick Alexander, who's probably worth keeping an eye on up north. He probably would be one of your classes of value buy, but Ballycommon boys certainly would be one for a bumper. G-Force Flyer, another who done well, and seeing him in the yard recently, he's come on plenty, and I know Kevin Brogan rides him plenty at home and is pretty positive in his feedback about him. So again, he'd be another one. They're both 4-year-olds, so I'd expect they'd be starting down a bumper route. Hold the Sayers 5, so he'd probably one who might go straight over hurdles. And I actually seen him school under Sean the week, either last week or the week before, and he jumped particularly well. So he's a grey who is part owned by the McNeil family. And he'd be another one to note him straight into a novice hurdle.
Yeah, seemingly trying to build on what has been a very good couple of years, in particularly last season, and the Whately's putting more and more money into that yard. So it's going to be a real interesting season ahead for that yard if they can get a few of these going into sort of top class novice company. I think that's the one thing they've really lacked, is that real out and out star, and they are certainly going all out to find him. And another yard who do not shy away from spending good money and getting points in is Lucinda Russell, obviously now with Michael Scudamore. And now they've got a horse called Jet of Stars, who I know, Paul, you are quite a big fan of and have quite high hopes for.
Yeah, he's actually the only point-to-point who managed to make it into the list of leading prospects in jumps to follow. Not many.
Pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah. The odd time I do slip one or two in there, and he's gone in there this year just because, say, based up north. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities for him again. Whether he goes, I would imagine he looked speedy enough to me to go down the bumper route, so I would imagine that will be the case. Talking about a yard that spend a lot of money, generally you kind of link their purchases over the years. I know Paul McIver, who does their race plan, he does a lot of the buying as well alongside Lucinda and Scu. They've had a fantastic record and strike rate. But you look at, they tend. Previously, you've seen them. They're the type of yard that would buy those horses who've run 2 or 3 times and been beaten. Maybe those so-called top owners wouldn't look at those kind of horses, but they're the ones that people who want to spend a little bit less, maybe in that 60 to 80 grand bracket. They've shown promise in those races, but Jet of Stars certainly doesn't fall into that bracket. He's a 4-year-old who won first time out, cost 230,000. Again, came out of the festival sale. So say, first thing I would note from that is that it was a more expensive purchase than usual from that stable. He's a half brother to John Spirit, obviously won the Paddy Power going back a good few years now, and other winners. There's plenty of good ground in that pedigree as well, and his point to point actually came over 2.5 miles on yielding ground. So again, the way he travelled through the race, cruise to the lead 2 out, would suggest that he is a horse with plenty of natural pace. So he'd be one I'd be thinking would go down the bumper route, and that is actually a race that has worked out well. Some of the others we haven't been able to see that, and it's a case of visual impression. But the 2 horses touched upon earlier of JP's, Sounders a Bell 3rd, Harry Lowe's 4th. Both of those went on to win the same maiden, the 2 divisions of the same maiden. So thank that form. And as I say, I think he'll have no problem handling better ground. So yeah, he'd be one to be excited about up north.
And one more then under the radar from a stable that, again, has had decent investment this year, but wouldn't be the first port of call for most people, and that's Jamie Snowden. And he has Saphos World. Is that another one that you're quite keen on?
Yeah, definitely the 3rd filly I've included. Actually, I didn't realise when you asked me for 6, I didn't realise it wasn't intentional. I gave you 3 Geldens and 3 fillies. That's just the way it's worked out. But we know, as we know, if you can find a good filly or mare, the potential's there with the race program that's open to them nowadays. I was at Jamie's a couple of weeks ago as well, and walking around with him, I'd say probably got the best squad of horses in terms of strength and depth that he's had previously. So, been an exciting season for him. And she was one. She featured in the book anyway, but she is definitely one. I haven't seen her up close that she impressed me even more just seeing her from a physical perspective. She's a huge filly. So whether Jamie was talking about going down the bumper route with her, but if you looked at her, you wouldn't think that she was necessarily a bumper horse. So if she does appear in the bumper, you'd say she'd definitely want to gallop and track, maybe a Foss Lass or somewhere of that ilk. Jamie doesn't mind sending them down there, and indeed he doesn't mind sending them up north, as we've seen over the years. But she's another Poet's Word filly. She's actually a half sister to a horse Into the Park, who I think you know very well from Philip Hobbs and Johnson White stayed a couple of times over hurdles last year. She just won a 6-runner race at Lingstown, and again, it wouldn't be a case of you wouldn't think that would be the strongest form on offer. But John Joe had gone out and bought the second. So obviously there's a few people who think the form will work out, and I thought she idled a bit in front. Again, it's things like that when you're watching the races back, not necessarily just the distance, how they've won, but how they've got to the lead. And I thought she'd have gone away and won more convincingly. So I think Jamie might well have picked a nice mare up on her hands for say if she does go over hurdles. I was wondering if maybe she's one who would end up in the Jane Seymour we've seen over the years. In recent years, he's had a great record in that. Anything for Love 2021, You Wear It Well 2023, and of course this year he won it with Holly Grove Cha Cha. So maybe if she turns out to be that good, she could end up going down that route.
Yeah, absolutely, and a very interesting one there, as you say. And another trainer who has no issues getting a good mare onto the track is Dan Skelton. First horse we're actually going to touch on of his here, and that's Manila Marathon. I see a 200 grand purchase, and seemingly Ronnie Bartlett's first horse with the yard as well, which is pretty interesting. And seemingly the second from that point, a bit of an eye catcher as well.
Yeah, again, the two of them get a good positive mention in the book, as you say. The first horse that Ronnie Bartlett will have had with Dan, I believe. And interestingly, in the expert selections in the book, this horse was nominated by George Stanner. Some people might know George as the auctioneer for Goffs UK, which is obviously one of his roles. But he works at Yorton Farm as well, which is alongside James and Jean Potter, who bred this horse. So he's obviously seen him, not just sold him in the ring, but he's seen him progress from as a young horse, and he's particularly keen on him. And when I was at Bangor last week, actually, I was chatting to James Potter, and Manila Marathon was seemed to be the horse that all the talk was about. So positive vibes for him, yeah. And again, probably a more obvious one coming from Dan's yard.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. That's 10 point-to-point recruits, probably even more with the others we've mentioned that finished in second, thirds, and fourths, this extra throughout the video. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Paul, and best of luck for the season ahead.
Well, no problem at all, lads. My pleasure. And as I say, hope the show goes well.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the French horses with Adam Mills.
Now we're going to get stuck into the French recruits coming across this season, and welcome Adam back to the show. You are very much the belle of the ball at this time of the year. Everyone wants to know you. Everyone wants to be your absolute best friend as we head into the start of the season. And so thank you very much for making time to come back. Last year, a bit of a strange one. I think obviously some decent types eventually. A few underperforming ones though compared to prior years. I'm just curious before we get stuck into this year's. In your mind, was that just a bit of natural variance, perhaps? Obviously, we've had a few very spectacular years in terms of the French horses coming over. Or was there any other factor potentially in why some of those coming across underperformed?
I'm not sure if it's natural variance. I think it's a trend. And the trend is that if you think about the likes of, go back 15, 20 years, Corto Star, for example, 10 starts in France before he was sold. This year, I think I can count on one hand the number of horses who've had more than 3 starts. So it's becoming a bit of a trend, particularly with the agents, that it's a case of one runner or toy, go and spend the big money and we'll take the chance. Unfortunately, that leaves a lot of us with guesswork in terms of what we're looking at. So last year, made a complete arse of myself by saying in September, there's this horse called Willie de Hall. I don't think he'll get beaten at time. Get on, son. I think on another podcast, I made the mistake of saying if it was run tomorrow, it'd be even money favourite. Jesus wept. It's a shame that it's a shame the way it ended for him. But yeah, so that was a real eye opener. But if you think about when we recorded last year's show, we recorded that before Lou Lambert and Live Conti had made their debuts. And actually, probably at the end of the season, they were the two best 4-year-olds, certainly in the UK. So from that angle, it's kind of a little bit humbling, but it's also a real trend that you have to take so much of this with a pinch of salt. Half the horses that are sold after one run are primed for their life on debut because they're for sale. The owners, the breeders, they're looking to cash in, and it's very hard to get a handle on the form. So if there's a lesson from last year for me, which is probably the first year when I've really been like, Lambert getting done was a bit of a pain, but actually, other than Lambert, I was way off with the French horses. So this year I've kind of kept my powder dry and been a little bit more sceptical, as we'll probably come to when we look at the form in a minute.
Not the finest year of French recruits, but hopefully we've got the new batch here, and we're going to start off by looking at a couple of the obvious ones. So obviously every year we try and uncover some hidden gems as well, and we'll definitely be doing that along the way. But we're going to start off with the Triumph Hurdle market. And, they're very, very partial markets this time of year. We've got a couple of bookies. We don't have them across the board like we used to by this time of year. But the one who's currently top is Narcisco Has for Willie Mullins, JP McManus. What is he like, Adam? Is he worthy of his place in the market?
Well, it's an interesting one. The thing they want to look at is say, oh, he won the pre-Wild Monarch. And Sergino won the pre-Wild Monarch, beating Salvatore Mundi, which is probably the best renewal of that race. So everyone now looks at that race and thinks, oh, that's where the Triumph Hurdle comes from. Very true. Bustleton won that race as well. He developed into a nice horse. Paradiso was a Cambaceres horse who now has gone off to stud. But if you look at the history of the pre-Wild Monarch, there's some other winners here like Le Coeur des Hommes, Kaluka, Kick Up, Fiumicino. You know, most people were like, who are they? Never heard of them. If you then look at that, the pre-Wild Monarch for the Poulons and the horses that were like also ran or that finished placed, Kivala du Burle, Salvatore Mundi, Gaelic Warrior, Botox Has, Footpad and State Man all ran in that race but didn't win it. And I feel like Narciso has made his way to the top of the Triumph Hurdle market because there's so much guesswork going on. And everyone's looking at the pre-Wild Monarch and thinking, oh, this is Sergino Mark II and Willie's bought him. He's obviously been bought with the Triumph Hurdle in mind. JP McManus would have paid big bucks for him. But since that race, the rest of the field are 1 win from 10 starts. Only the 5th has won since. Now, Narciso Has was the best horse. He raced prominently. His jumping was a little bit novice-y, but that's perfectly understandable in a field of debutants. He was really helped when at the last, the horse who eventually finished second really pecked on landing, lost all momentum. But Narciso has had the rail. He was in control. The time was 18 seconds above the standard, but on ground described as very soft, which we would probably call soft. That's probably fair. The time's all right. The form's all right. But if you look at the pedigree, the dam was 2 from 38 in her career, got to a peak rating, the equivalent of 132. There are 3 black type progeny. Chatter Joanna Has, Na Has, and Namor Has. They're all good horses, but they were good horses in French 3-year-old hurdles. French 3-year-old hurdles, pattern class, you probably need to run to a mark of 130 to 135 to finish in the frame. It's not like you've got to put in a Triumph Hurdle winning 145, 150 performance. So there's just a little bit of a pinch of salt that wherever he goes, when he makes his debut for Willie Mullins, which I would assume will be in perhaps the Fairy House race, at the November meeting or maybe over Christmas, you know, this thing's going to be like 2 to 7. Just because of the connections and because of the history. But I think you've got to hold back because there are other 3-year-olds who've probably achieved more during their brief time in France.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's a very much it becomes a trend race. Races become trend races to follow all the time. It happens in France, happens in the UK, happens in Ireland, and there's people make patterns and assume things are going to happen without necessarily the evidence to support it being a long-term trend. So interesting assessment of a horse who's already been clearly highly touted. We'll go to another very highly touted, seemingly JP recruit now with Nicky Henderson called Man Lager. A short of 7 to 1 for the Triumph, I've noticed, with Unibet, which is maybe particularly interesting given obviously the connection with the yard there. Obviously, Warner only started the Autoy back in March. What can you tell us about her?
Well, the first thing I'll say about her is she comes from the Roland Yard, who have really dominated the French 3-year-old division in the last 2 years. They've had Jigme and Nietzsche Has, who are both the best 3-year-old in France for their season. JP bought her on the back of a very impressive win at Autoy. She's a half-sister to Marta Tour of Venetia Williams, but the pre-auricular has worked out a lot better than the pre-Wild Monarch. The second was a horse called Manita, who's been sold to Willie Mullins and will run in the Ritchie colours. The third, Donatella's had injury problems and has been pulled up, so we can rule her out. But the fourth, Olga de Kiev, who was a very fast finisher on the day and got an interesting ride, shall we say, and was left with a lot to do. But she's since gone on to win the Grade 3 Prix Sagan in May. The 5th, Madame de la Bruni, is now rated 120. The 6th, Golden Falls, won at Dieppe and has now been sold to Lucy Wadham. Even the 7th and 8th placed on their next start. So there is a bit of substance to the form. The time was quite good. Quicker than the boys' race on the day. They're sort of the first 3-year-old races of the season at Autoy, so you tend to get the precocious types. But what I do like about her is she's quite cautious at her hurdles, but she got her feet right every time. Sometimes these youngsters can just crash through the top and hope for the best, whereas she was keen to put in an extra stride or to drop her pace. She's obviously got to improve on that, but when the sprint began for home, she really asserted with the rail. Best horse in the race was what I wrote in my notes. Slight doubt because she wore both a tongue tie and a hood on debut. That may just be because she was in the shop window and they wanted to keep her as calm as possible, but just something to look out for. Look, it's ridiculous to really have a Triumph hurdle market at this stage, but she should probably be a shorter price than Narciso has on what she's actually achieved, at least.
Yeah, and another exciting filly that I've definitely been tracking for a while. I was very keen to find out where she went, and that's Monge 2, who's gone to Gordon Elliott for the Rodcourt team. She's a half sister to Imperic Pass, no less. Obviously, was a very impressive winner at Compiègne. What do you think about her? Is she up there with the likes of the first two we've spoken about, or is she just a level below?
Um, she might be up there with them. Certainly, she's more interesting than they are in terms of people may not have looked at this form as much. One at Compiègne, half sister to Imperial Pass, as you said. That was a €22,000 race at Compiègne, so it's quite a decent one for owner trainer Elizabeth Allaire. But when a horse wins by 15 lengths, you think, oh, that's quite unusual. What was in behind her? Now, the 15 lengths is massively exaggerated because there was a horse in the race called Mary Shelley who was probably would have finished second, but was giving her a race. She came down at the last. Mary Shelley's won a race since, but the time was really good. 4 minutes, 3 seconds, 0.73. That's just 2.22 seconds above the standard time that I keep. So that's one of the fastest times at Compiègne last season. Another one who wore a hood and a tongue tie. Look, she had the race in hand at the point Mary Shelley came down. And once you get that stands rail at Compiègne, you can't lose. It's almost impossible for someone to come past you. But she was really impressive. She'll definitely be under the radar. I think she might need a little bit of cut in the ground. So it might not be one that Gordon brings out so quickly, but certainly interesting.
Yeah, from three pretty high profile ones there that we probably will be seeing in some capacity in graded races down the season. The one who's probably a bit more left field, one with Jamie Snowden called Millpat for the McNeil and the Stone families, who was second in what might be a key AQPS flat race earlier in the year.
Yeah, this is if you haven't watched the pre-Jeffrey de la Selle at Moulin, which I'm assuming most people watching this haven't, this is going to be a really key race because the first three ran in this race and were all sold. Manoir de Mirande is the interesting one in terms of the way that that horse travelled, and that's gone to Gordon Elliott, best horse on the day. Millpat was second, and the third, Max Shadow de Cray, has gone to Nicky Anderson. Millpat is a Cocorico AQPS, but he was owned by Sam Sutton and James Finch. If you're interested in French racing, you might know the Claiming Lads podcast, who do a really good podcast about the racing at Auteuil and what it's like to buy and trade and sell and run horses in France. He was owned by them and he ran a really nice race on debut and they've cashed in. He's gone to Jamie Snowden. But what I liked about Millpat is at the end of the back straight, he was already off the bridle. And at that point, you're thinking, well, in an AQPS race, he's just immature and he's not ready and he's going to fall out the back of the telly. But despite being nudged along, he responds really well. Now, look, he's no match for the easy winner, but he's really stayed on nicely. I think he's going to be a lovely long-term prospect. He's a clear second on the day. The dam was placed in a Grade 3 AQPS race at Dirtal, didn't really make it as a hurdler, and there aren't too many obvious names on the page. I was struggling to find a horse to mention. Philip is probably the best. He was a 7-time winner in France, but he never got to a rating higher than the equivalent of 135. So it's probably one that's not necessarily going to be a 3-year-old Triumph Hurdle prospect by any means. But in 2 or 3 years' time, he should make up into a really nice novice chaser.
Yeah, very good. And we've already had two JP McManus horses, so what's one more? But at least this one is with another, you know, under the radar trainer, I guess, in terms of French recruits, and that's Ben Pauling for Mojito de Mott. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, Mahito de Mott is certainly interesting. He's another winner at Moulin, won over hurdles. The second Metronomique has now won a 3-year-old chase, and those two pulled 10 lengths clear of the rest. Now, the form is certainly suspect. The third, fourth, and fifth are all winless since the other winners to come out of the race have won in claiming company or provincial races. He looks to me like he hits the ground quite hard. He's by Clovis de Burle. I think he's going to need soft ground, which he got on the day. Because he won a race in March, he won't be a novice. So I have seen a few comments saying this could be the next Mambo number 5. Well, it won't be because he's not a novice. With Mambo number 5, they had the luxury that he hadn't won a race, so they could roll the big dice, throw him in at the deep end, and he either won or they kept him for this season. He ended up winning at Kempton. I think this lad will end up being campaigned as a Triumph Hurdle horse. Whether or not he gets the ground and conditions to do so, I'm not sure. He's certainly got an easy time of things at Moulin in terms of that there weren't too many in that race that were capable of getting to him. And in the closing stages, he really kicked in the turbo. His jumping has got to improve, but having only had one run, there's every reason to think he will do. Ben Pauling's really got no choice. You've got to press on. You don't want to waste his hurdling season. You need to get some experience into him. He looks to me the type that we'll see in the Triumph Hurdle Trials.
I love the idea of a horse being compared to the next Mambo number 5. I never thought I'd hear that sentence. A fine horse, but not what I thought we'd be looking at as like an echelon of what could only be. But these are the times we live in. One, I think it is particularly interesting and used to be in the colours of David Maxwell, was sold prior to his retirement announcement, is Lascar de Matan, who's going to be with Gordon Elliott. Obviously now with Rob Corr, who again have clearly spent quite a lot this season. Obviously 4-year-old who was formerly with Noel George.
Yeah, this lad is the one that's really intriguing. David Maxwell's obviously announced his retirement. Love the fella, wish him very well. But this horse was sold long before that announcement. He was gone and in Gordon's yard by April. Debut winner for under James Reevely at Compiègne last November. That form's okay, but what he did in the pre-ventriloquy was different. I mean, David Maxwell, how can I put it? Well, he's sitting there with a double handful, which was his style, but at the same time, turning for home, this horse was absolutely cantering. And David Maxwell barely had to move on him. He pulled clear to win easily. He gave 4 kilos and a beating to horse 3 subsequent winners. The horses behind him would now be rated 130, 122, and 130. His dam's a half sister to Cabral de Matan. He looks a fantastic prospect. He cost 100 grand as a store at Arcana in 2023. So they put the money in. I'd assume he cost an awful lot more than that to get him out of David Maxwell's hands. And what's interesting about him is, bearing in mind he's a 4-year-old, they could have held on to him and gone for the grade 1 at Auteuil in May, but they decided to cash in. It's not ideal because he's not a novice. He's only had 2 starts. So Gordon, I've seen on a couple of comments and initial stable tours, has said, there's a 4-year-old hurdle we could maybe aim at, and we'll just see what we've got because he's light on experience. But the final circuit time at Auteuil is the thing that pricks my ears. Final circuit time for him was 2 minutes 42.07. Which on the same day, the 3-year-old grade 1 winner Son d'Esprit made his comeback, and Lascar de Matan was quicker. So there's plenty of ability, there's plenty of speed. It must, before David Maxwell retired, he took the view that he wouldn't let anyone else ride his horses, despite the fact it was probably obvious they might improve for it. And yet he was prepared to cash in on this lad. So whoever's bought him and done the work has obviously seen something and obviously produced a check to a very rich man that he couldn't turn down. He is absolutely fascinating, and I think he's going to be top class.
If we do talk about, obviously last year we had some notable French horses that didn't perform. One who ended up performing quite well was Mercia. Obviously one of my favorite types of angles to look at here, Kenny Alexander. Just year on year, Gala Marceau, Cargies, last year obviously with Mercia. Has he found another one here with Mojalik? Is she up to that type of level? Is she going to give him a 4th grade 1 as a juvenile in a row?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. To be honest, I was surprised you put this name on the list. I mean, I'm not sure if Dan's aware that you've been cheating on him by watching flat maidens at Paris Longchamp, but she's certainly in the book, right connections, the dam won over fences, half sister the whole town hero. She's bred by Joel Denis. He's had a really good year with the likes of Le Petit Cheval and Maharaja. So there's quite a nice 3-year-old pedigree. I'd imagine she's been schooled by Tigron, not the most well-known sire, but he has had winners over obstacles in France. I would say on her flat debut, she ran to a mark in the region of 80 to 85. That maiden was a 23 grand race at Paris Longchamp for debutantes. And it was a typical French maiden in that they basically crawled down the hill and it became a 3-furlong sprint. But having got herself in the wrong position, she had to wait for racing room. And then when she got clear on the running on the outside, the head went down, the pace really quickened, and she got herself in front. The runner-up is a horse of Francis-Henri Graffard's I really like called Velakaya. She's won twice since and would now have a rating of 88 if she ran on the flat in the UK. So we can say with some assumption that she's run to a pretty high standard on debut. They've decided to go in. She's not necessarily coming in the same route as Mercia and Cargies in terms of the experience, but it's certainly interesting given her pedigree and given the fact that they've gone to Paris Longchamp together. She looks to me like she might appreciate better ground rather than soft. She looked quite a lightly framed filly, but yeah, she's certainly one that goes in the could be anything category.
Yeah, very interesting. And again, that conveyor belt, you have to admire the consistency which have been able to recruit. It's clearly a market, as you mentioned earlier, Adam, there is a lot of I guess somewhat speculation and guesswork that goes in with these lightly raced types, and the fact they've been able to pluck out three in a row in that division of fillies has been quite remarkable, really. So it'll be interesting to see if they can make it four-time lucky. One who's probably more of a again under the radar type with a training probably I'm more used to assuming in David Pipe buying more experienced French horses who invariably go into handicaps, but not so with this one in Parchment. Obviously won at Clairefontaine back in June. What's his prospects like? Because he looks an interesting proposition for the Pipe team.
Yeah, he's not the David Pipe sort, if that makes sense. In that normally I'd look at David Pipe on my list and think, aye, there must have been a claimer somewhere and he's picked something up. But this is an interesting purchase. Come out in Old Georgia Yard. He's by Triple Threat, the sire of Mr. Policeman, Son Bree. So there's a bit of sort of ability there. But his debut win at Clairefontaine's really eye-catching. They turn from home at Clairefontaine, and normally you want to come wide, get the stands rail, get a clear run. Parchment on the bridle, I should add, went down the inside route and he absolutely cantered to the last. And then after the last, a quick shake of the reins and he won, essentially nudged out. The second is a horse who's joined Paul Nicholls called Pourquoi Pas Papa, which will be fun for commentators. But I think the race has worked out all right because the third and fourth have both won since. It's a good piece of form. The time was pretty good. It was probably softish ground, but in the summer he is not. People will look and think, oh, David Pipe, this is going to end up running in being a handicap plot for Wincanton and Newton Abbott in the spring. But I think this is going to be a graded project where they're looking at trying to see can we make him up into a Triumph Hurdle horse. I've no idea how high he'll reach. The other thing to say about him is because he won a race at Clairefontaine, not Auteuil, he only won 17,000. I say only one, like most British connections would turn it down. But the key to that is if you win more than 20,000, you have to carry a penalty because the BHA consider a race worth 20 for more than 20,000 internationally is a class two event. This one wasn't. So if wherever he turns up, if they do decide to roll the dice in something like the Wensleydale at Wetherby, there'll be the option that he won't have to carry the penalty.
Yeah, it's always a useful thing, isn't it? Not having to carry a penalty, especially in these early season events. One more from a under the radar, especially trainer, Warren Greatrix. But this horse is certainly well bred. Dan's one of his favourite horses, I think, of all time from the jump show, Vauban, a half brother called Manigod. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I put Manigod on the list for a reason because when I was trying to promote my sort of French recruit series for this year, I thought, oh, Manigod's joined Warren Greatrix, half brother to Vauban. There's a bit of clickbait. I apologise for that. But immediately I got all these DMs going, I'm going to get a price for the Supreme. And it's like, well, just hold on a minute. Let's slow it down, lads. 0 from 8 on the flat. His French flat rating is the equivalent of 66. And he started over 12 furlongs. He's had a bit of a 6-month absence at the start of this year. This is not Vauban. Definitely not Vauban. And if you look through the page, he's by American Devil, who's sort of, you would think would inflict a kind of 6-7 furlong speed. But Manigod didn't get that. What he got was all of the stayers in the family. All of that staying pedigree came in. The dam was only 1 from 23, but she's a half sister to pattern class stayers on the flat. Mackie, Wedding in May. If you go hard enough in the pedigree, you'll find DeCapo of Gordon Elliott's. Manigod is the type of horse who's probably going to struggle in early season novice hurdles if that's the route they decide to go down. I kind of expect Dan might see him on a wet Wednesday afternoon at Wincanton or Stratford if he's there. Those kind of events. But Vauban is the fastest horse on the page by a mile. And I'm not saying for one moment that these two horses are even in the same bracket. But he does look like he stays forever. His best start in France was his last one when he was second to a horse called Phare l'Amour at Argentan. It's a very difficult thing to be a slow horse in France, particularly on the flat, because the races are slowly run. They develop into a sprint. If you've got no turn of foot, even over 12 furlongs, you're in trouble. I think he'll benefit from a stronger pace, but this is definitely a longer term project. I really hope the Million in Mine partnership and Warren Greatrix have some fun with him. I will be stunned if he runs at Cheltenham in March.
That fills my heart that I might see him on a very cold, miserable day sometime in February. I guess the one thing is the fact that he is owned by the Million in Mind partnership. Obviously, their objective is effectively to get as much prize money as possible in that season before moving him on. So maybe he could be a little type, as you say, for a handicap sort of later down the line, just to pick up some money rather than try and go over the board in a novice hurdle. I think one set of connections who'll probably tend to aim a little bit high is Johnny Delahaye, and he has one here with Dan Skelton called Mille une Vie. I think name means 1,001 lives, according to my intense knowledge of the French language, and definitely not Google Translate. 3-year-old filly, yet to win in 3 starts, but looks to have some fair form to her name.
Yeah, yet to win in 3 starts is the key statement here. This is why she was bought, because she's still a novice. Dan Skelton can afford to really roll the dice with her, pitch her in at the deep end, sink or swim. If she doesn't win, fair enough, we'll come back next year. But her form really checks out. Third on debut in the pre-geography to Delmegan. That was the race that Lossiemouth won in France. Then she was second to the same horse in the pre-Girofalo, but got a bit closer. Reversed the form in the pre-Sagan, but bumped into the strong staying Olga de Kiev. Beaten 8 lengths, but I think that's a pretty solid start. She looks to me like she just needs to do a bit of growing. I think she'll probably be a better horse this winter than she was last spring. That is the best fillies form in France, and she's got it in there. She was certainly competitive. I wrote down though, will they want to waste her novice status? So I don't think we'll see her in some sort of 3-year-old event at Doncaster. I think they'll go big because she's got so much form in the book. It would seem a mistake to go and pick up 4 grand and lose that novice status when she may well still need time. But it's a really good French family. She's a half sister to Japon, who was third to Losange Bleu in the Grade 1 Renault Vivier. Also a half to Harlar Land, who's a listed winner. On the dam side, I found loads of pattern performers. Terra Nueva, Hannah Deloire, Julena Land, Jabarossa, Edjoy, even Vicente is there if you go look far enough. It's a long-term project. It's not just a 3-year-old hurdler, but I think we'll probably see her in one of the trials. That's where they'll find out where they are. But it wouldn't surprise me equally if she had a couple of runs and they decided she needed a bit more time and she's a horse for the following season.
Yeah, there's loads of options for 3-year-old fillies. We know. I mean, those listed races early in the season as well. They don't tend to be the strongest events, so maybe one for those early season. If he wins in happy days, crack on, or as you say, maybe just kind of reserve her a little bit for down the line. Thanks for that, Adam. That was fantastic running through those kind of 10. Just before we let you go, any others particularly you want to mention, either that may not have left France yet, so maybe some of the older types, anything else you think is definitely worthy of a mention at this stage?
There's a couple of horses to look out for who I just don't know about. The first is a horse called Ole Ole from Hugo Merien. No idea where that's gone. If anyone could point me in the right direction, that's great, but his debut form's all right. But in terms of in France, there's a horse called Matin Midi et Soir, who runs for Simon Menier and Isaac Suede, won the Grade 3 at Auteuil last week. At this stage, he looks to be the best 3-year-old still running in France. And I think if there was an Ante-Post market for the Cambacérès, which is the Grade 1 in November, he'd be the favourite. Given his ownership, it wouldn't surprise me if he ran in that and then ended up being switched at some point in the future. There are lots of Twitter rumours about a certain horse called Ile Francais, although it's not confirmed where he's going yet, but he's definitely not with Noel George. I am of the opinion that Ile Francais is gone at the game, and I think he's far too moody and doesn't like it when anything challenges him. So I'm not particularly interested. I know a few people are thinking, oh, he might be a King George one. I think it's a lot more than just the trainer. I don't think Noel George is the issue. I think it's mental, but we shall see. And then just from last year, there's a horse called Fou de Trois, who we didn't see for Willie Mullins. His debut form was behind Apollon de Louis and Sauvignon, who I may have mentioned was a Triumph Hurdle prospect last year. Oh dear. But that debut was still really promising. We haven't seen him since. I've noticed he's in the betting for the Supreme and the Ballymore. You know, whether he turns into that, I'm not really sure. But this time last year, I was really excited about him. So the fact we haven't seen him, he hasn't done anything to dampen that excitement. I noticed that Jake put on the bottom cheekily that he wanted, so if you had to have an Ante-Post bet, I know you're not going to, but if you had to, if I had to, which I haven't and I'm not going to, Paddy Powers go 80-1 Lascar to Matan for the champion hurdle at the time of recording. I'm not saying you need to back him now, but he might be one to keep an eye on, because if he's really good and he wins on debut, they've really got no choice. And it's not like that division is absolutely concrete and set in stone. He could potentially at least run in the champion hurdle, and at a big price, it's worth a couple of quid.
Well,
There
you
is
said
your
earlier you're
headline.
not going to give. Yeah, you said you weren't going to give us clickbait, but Jake is now very happy because he can now put that front and center and even take that as a little snippet and put it everywhere. So you have delivered for him in spades there. No, that was fantastic, Adam. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure everyone watching this will appreciate how informative that's been. And if you have reached this stage in the video, then surely, if you haven't already, please do click that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't also forget, we have that discount code for the Paul Ferguson Jumpers to Follow book of JSJTF2526 if you want £3 off that. And also our giveaway for 2 physical copies. Comment below Jumpers to Follow to enter that, and we'll announce the winner, or winners rather, this time next week. But thank you very much for tuning in to this very informative episode of The Jump Show, and we will see you next week as we continue the build-up to the new jump season.